For anybody that's a NASCAR fan knows Dave Alpern. He's the president of Joe Gibbs Racing, one of the premier teams in the entire sport. But if you are not a NASCAR fan, I understand, but you're going to love this story because Dave was put in a position where he was to take the role of his best friend because his best friend, Joe Gibbs' son, passed away. An incredibly difficult time and decision for Dave to make. But as you can probably imagine, his faith in Jesus really helped him with that in the process of this role. So please enjoy our conversation at Joe Gibbs Racing.
It started early with JD and I, and he kind of really became my moral compass. There were so many things about it that, from a human standpoint, just make no sense. Does God love me and is he in control? And if the answer is yes, I have to be okay with it. It felt like, not as much in the son role, but in the JD role, that everyone in the company and everyone outside the company was looking to me to now be JD.
When you wrote the book, I know your mantra is to go fast. Have you slowed down yourself personally, like take a look and reflect, and you've been able to slow down and realize the fact that you started on teachers and you didn't get paid for it, and now you're the president of the Gibbs Race. I know that's such a bold question.
I think my wife would confirm that I haven't slowed down, so to speak, as much, and that is something honestly that I'd say I struggle with personally. Is I have a racing mind all the time, and it is hard for me mentally and physically to slow down. And so, the book, I think the book was difficult in and of itself, because when you're like me, again, I'm very ADD. It's hard for me to slow down. The discipline of writing a book was nerve-wracking. Honestly, I would say I was taking notes of the book for probably 8 years, but I would say it was 2 years of being deliberate about it. And honestly, it came in little spurts of an hour. Like, I would wake up an hour early a few days a week. I would, every time I was on an airplane, I would write. It would be in chunks because I just couldn't concentrate for that long in my mind. You know, if I tried to spend 2 or 3 hours on it, my mind would be I would have accomplished 5 other tasks during that time, because my mind, I'm kind of like a cat with a laser pen. So it was difficult. But all that to say, again, I'm not great at slowing down always and reflecting. I try to start my mornings, spending time with the Lord and having quiet time to discipline. Even that is I have to put my phone in another room. I have to have not too many things there to look at or read, because I'll get distracted. And it's just a discipline for me. I have to be intentional about that.
When you look back at life, when did you find God? When did you start to form a relationship?
Yeah, so it was in high school. So there was a ministry called Young Life, which basically is a ministry that's a parachurch ministry that's for kids that really aren't plugged into church like me. And I call it a bridge to the local church. So there's kids like me in high school that probably wouldn't have gone to a youth group if somebody invited me, but they'd go to a meeting in someone's house where they talk about God and do fun stuff. And for me, that was Young Life, but I was that kid that was. So I was raised not going to church. My dad was Jewish, but we didn't practice. We didn't go to synagogue. We didn't go to church. I just really had no experience with God, other than I had an awareness that there was a God. I would often at night talk. My parents got divorced when I was younger, and we can talk in a little bit. I had a disorder called Tourette's syndrome, and a lot of those things drew me to a God that I didn't know, but I knew was there, and I would talk to him, not really knowing who he was or didn't know anything about Jesus at an early age. But then in high school, I started going to these Young Life meetings, and I started hearing, and my Young Life leader was a guy named Rick Beckwith and another guy, John Colston. Still to this day, I talk to Rick almost every week. He still mentors me. But I remember him talking about, he would tell stories from the Bible, and it's like on one hand it resonated with me, but on the other hand, my dad was an electrical engineer, real smart. I would just go, this is crazy. Like, I just couldn't reconcile this message that, there's a God of the universe who actually sent his son in human form to live a perfect life, who can hear me when I pray, and there's billions of people praying at the same time, yet he hears all of them. And I was like, this is nuts. And the Bible talks about, being, crucifixion and, eating flesh and drinking blood, and you're kind of going, this is nuts. And so I kept going to these meetings because there was something attractive about the people there and the difference in their lives. But the message, let's just say I was a little resistant to for over a year. But the thing that stood out was those leaders, Rick and John, they didn't treat me any different when I didn't respond to it. And that's honestly what was the difference. It wasn't like, oh, we can't check him off and move on. Let's move on to the next kid. They just kept loving on me. They would take me to lunch and they go, hey, do you have any questions? And I was like, I got a lot of questions. I got a ton of questions. And I would ask them and they would give me books. I remember they gave me a book, More Than a Carpenter, and a simple book that talked about, things like how do we know the resurrection happened and things like that. And it was my senior year of high school where I kind of came to the conclusion. And actually, I mentioned the resurrection. It really was the story of the resurrection that was sort of the kicker for me. And the way I saw it, I had 100 questions. But if I could take the most outlandish thing, the most crazy question that I had and be okay with that, then all the other ones didn't really matter. It's like if I can believe that Jesus Christ actually was resurrected, then worrying about some of the other things, I'm sure those are fine if this didn't happen, then this is all a farce. And so what really resonated with me was this idea that the disciples who all bailed on him, and they were home free, when he appeared to them, they all went, oh my gosh, it's real. And they went back and got martyred for it. And 11 guys aren't going to die for a lie. I had somebody tell me once, those terrorists that flew into the buildings, they died for what we would say is a lie, what their belief was, but there was a difference. They believed it was true. So those disciples would have had to know it was a lie. They would have had to say, this is really a hoax, but we're going through with it. No chance. It wouldn't have happened. So they all went back and got martyred because they saw Jesus after they were free and clear, And so I guess that resurrection idea to me, this isn't a feeling or this is either true or it isn't. Jesus Christ either came to earth and was resurrected or he didn't. Period.
What's your biggest question today? Because I think the closer we get to God, the more of a relationship we get to God.
No doubt.
The more questions we have, which I think he wants, and I think is
he does. Yeah,
it's okay. And so many people on the outside are like, "Well, if you still have questions, like,
no.
are you sure this is a real relationship?" Like, you could have, if you have a surface level relationship with somebody, it's simple to have no questions. But the deeper you get, the more questions you have. So, what is your biggest question?
Yeah. So. There are a lot of them. I mean, I think it's just this whole idea of, why do bad things happen to good people?
Mm-hmm.
And when you see, for everything happens for good for those who love the Lord. So when you think that, you think, well, that's a promise. That means if I love the Lord, everything that's going to happen to me is good. And the difference is God's good is different than our good. And so I wrestle with that sometimes. Just the difficult things in life that you think, this isn't how this should go. I feel like I should have, hey, I've been faithful in this, therefore I should get, quote, hooked up.
Right.
Okay.
I put my quarter in there.
Yeah. No, I mean, God is not an arcade machine. Right. He's not Santa Claus. But also as you grow in your faith, you become more okay with the questions that you have. That look, until my faith is sight, it's okay because now I have a 35-year history of seeing God's faithfulness. And so when I do have a question, I can rest in that and go, I can point back to this one time, this 10 times, these 100 times where God was faithful. So even though this one doesn't make sense, and I use this analogy often, that our life really is like a book. And there are chapters, there's pages, but there's entire chapters that sometimes stink, that sometimes make zero sense. And it's not till you get to the next chapter, you look back and you go, okay, now I kind of get it a little more. When I was in it, I wish I'd have had this perspective. And so the only one who knows is God. He wrote it. He wrote the book. And me as a sort of a planner, and I'm a little OCD, I would love to flip to the last page and just go, okay, good, this is going to be so much easier now that but we don't get to do that. And so you live your life doing the best you can. And again, when I became a Christian my senior year, it wasn't because I figured everything out or answered all of my questions. I gave all I knew of myself to all I knew of Jesus, which wasn't a ton, but it was enough to go, all right, I'm going to start this journey. And obviously what I know of Jesus now is more than I knew then, but it's certainly not what I want to know. And what I do know, I don't always obey. I mean, again, it's that process. So, but I would say that's one of my big questions. Again, as I like to control things, and so I guess the hardest part of being a Christian is it's the opposite of that. We literally are acknowledging we control nothing.
And I've learned in my career, my life, the more I try to control, the less control I have.
And that's no doubt.
If I just take my hands off the wheel, it's a lot easier and it's a lot less stressful.
It's so counterintuitive to do that, because it's like the world's message is just grab yourself by
100%.
bootstraps and you can do it. You have the power, and the
Your
truth
way.
is,
Everything's
I
about
actually
you.
don't.
Mm-hmm.
I do in Christ, and that's the I think that's the difference.
And the worst part is we try to, early on in my faith, in my relationship with Jesus, it was like my co-pilot. And I think Daryl Strawberry on a Relatable Journey said the same thing. He's like, God was like my co-pilot. I wanted him there, and I wanted him to kind of guide me from time to time when I called upon him. But it was like early on, you want to do it your way because you think your way is going to make you happy, and that's the right way.
No doubt.
And now you learn that's not the case.
Well, there's also reading the Bible and obeying what it says is one thing, and of course that's very hard.
Mm-hmm.
But then going to the next level and saying, I'm actually going to have a dynamic relationship with the person of Jesus Christ. That is different than following the
100%.
Tenets of Jesus Christ. Both they go hand in hand, but I am better at, I can read and obey, and I'm kind of a rule follower, and so I will try to do what it says as best I can, but that discipline of, talking to someone who you can't see, who often isn't, for some people he, I think, verbally speaks back to. He hasn't to me yet. Mm-hmm. I would love that. And by the way, I am one of those guys that, and I have 3 boys, and they tell me that they pray this as well. I pray, like, I want the clouds to roll back. I want my burning bush moment. I want God to roll back the clouds just this one time and show himself to me. And I always think, then it will be different. Like, then I'll not struggle with any of this stuff. But the truth is, I still would. Because the Bible is full of people who, God parted the Red Sea in front of them. And then the next day they were whining and complaining and going, what are we doing? So we think if we saw it, it would change. And I pray for that. I'm like, give me my burning bush. And the truth is I probably have a dozen of them every day that I don't see that way. That I'm like, that's just a coincidence. That's whatever. Yeah. God's like, I just gave it to you. You knucklehead. So I wrestle with that because, and I know that's why it's called faith. It's supposed to be called faith. But you're like, hey, could you just hook me up with this one, let me see this one miracle, and then I'll be even more faithful, whatever it is. So I think that's normal for, if anyone listening feels that way. I feel that way. And I've been a believer for 35 years.
It's funny for anyone that doesn't feel that way. I'm the opposite. So I struggle with the rules because I'm not a big rule guy. Okay. This whole mask thing has been a real challenge for me to keep over the nose, especially on the plane because I'm not an idiot. But that's a whole different conversation. I have no problem with the relationship standpoint of I talk with Jesus. I almost apologize at times. Like, I'm sorry if I'm treating you like my secretary or I'm bothering you.
I think he's good. I think he's good with that.
I know he is, but it's like
he's good with that.
Constantly talking. I'm constantly in a relationship. I'm constantly just trying to keeping that going because I struggle with the rules are a bit more of a struggle for me versus the relationship part. And I think when you're younger, you view Christ or God as rules.
Absolutely.
What you can't do, what you're not allowed to do. And that's kind of how I viewed it at first, for sure. And then I realized those rules are to set you free. And I know that sounds corny.
No, boundaries give freedom, and people don't understand that. We're about to do the NCAA tournament. Just think if they said, hey, by the way, this year at the tournament, we're going to have it in an open arena, and there's no lines, and there's no floor, and there's no nets. You'd go, well, you can't. You couldn't play. But you get freedom. Try standing on a balcony of a skyscraper with no railing. You're going to hover against the wall. I can already feel it. But all of a sudden you put a railing up and it's freedom, And so I've always viewed it that way. That God gave me a rule book or a playbook. Yep. And actually, I should have said playbook because it really is a playbook.
It is.
To best enjoy life.
It's the rules to success.
Exactly.
He gave us a book.
And we're like, no, I know better. I'm going to do it this way. And he's like, all right.
He's got to be up there.
Yeah.
Gosh.
But sometimes we do things and then we don't go back to the source and say, thank you, Lord, I recognize that from you. And for me, again, it goes back to the science part of it, is that if I just was certain that, this discipline wasn't, there's so much of the Christian faith that if you explain, that's why it says the gospel is folly to people who are perishing. If you explain it to someone like I was in high school, you're like, do you realize that's nuts? Like what you're talking, taking communion and all of those things, that you're really talking, you're talking to a person that lived 2,000. You're like, how does that work? And so again, that's where the whole concept of the Holy Spirit and all of that it's a process and of coming to grips with that. And again, those are the things that I think I struggle with in my faith. I do my best. And again, God has been faithful time and time again to me. So I often feel guilty that I have any doubts. Right. How could I doubt any of this?
Okay. And then, so I want to switch gears here a little bit, and it's your overarching story, at least in the business, is your dear friend JD, who is Joe Gibbs' son, your best friend, passes away. You, in your own words, took his job, what you thought was supposed to be his job. In your relationship with God, how did you get mad at him through this process? And kind of tell that story a little bit better than I just did.
Well, so going back, I mentioned hearing about Christ in high school through Young Life. Well, Young Life used to be at Joe Gibbs' house. And so in the 80s, here's this Hall of Fame coach hosting. Kids were like, I don't care if you're talking about gardening. I'm coming to your house. So there 300 kids would show up. And so JD...
And by the way, just to stop, what a platform that God gives Joe to spread the message. Not to be a Hall of Fame coach.
And he knew how to use it. He knew the influence they had. And by the way, it didn't hurt that he had two boys, and JD was my friend. And so he didn't hurt that he had a son who was living that faith out in high school. And I've said this often, JD was the physical picture of the message I was hearing up front. So as crazy as it sounded to me, I would go, that's what's different about JD. This message they just talked to me about treating others better than yourself, whatever, it's manifesting itself in this 17-year-old high school kid who was the quarterback of the football team and was the it guy, but just he taught me the power of influence early. So it started early with JD and I, and he kind of really became my moral compass. We became best friends, through college and then into early adulthood, and he asked me to come work with him, and JD ended up having 4 boys. I have 3 boys. Our boys grew up as best friends. Our wives are best friends. I mean, it was an amazing story. And so you asked, did I get mad during JD's illness? I describe it as I had several what I call a Lieutenant Dan moments, from Forrest Gump, where he's up at the top of that mast and he's like, we're having it out right now. Yeah. And I'm talking about, I did. And I was like, JD, really? Like, I know. Yeah. I know you
I believe it.
Supposedly know better than me, but you're going to literally take the one guy that if you ask me who's one guy who's figured this life out, I was like, JD Gibbs. He's the example, to all of us. Again, far from perfect, but had it figured out. And I'm like, you're going to take him? Our world needs more hymns. Take me, take someone else, take this guy over here who's a pain in the butt. Don't take JD. And to see him suffer and all the things that he did, it just was, again, when I go back to when you ask, what are the questions I have? That'll be the first thing. Now, I'm already 3 years away from him passing, and I can see the fruit that has come. It's unbelievable what God has done through that. So just the influence he's had and the people that come up to me, and just even his service at jdgibbslegacy.org has had like 9 million views. People that have watched, millions of people have watched the entire 90 minutes where I had the privilege to speak, Coach did, and hearing the gospel proclaimed through his death. And when you watch JD's service, if that's not an inspiration to live your life the right, you watch that and you go, that is a life well lived right there. Not one talk about accomplishments at work, money, nothing. It was all the impact that he had on other people through those platforms. And I can't tell you how many people are like, I left JD's funeral and it changed my life. I started going to church, or I started reading my Bible. And so you see that, and you see how God's using his 4 boys to turn into these young men, of God, and it's affected my family and this Joe Gibbs Racing family, but I don't like it. I mean, it's a guy I grew up with, and we had all these grand plans that, we raised our boys together, and we're going to run this race team till we get old, and we're going to go on our fun, we would go on vacations, and we would ski and snowboard together and go to the beach, and I'm like, really? You're going to take, selfishly, I'm like, you just took away my, what's, so there were so many things about it that from a human standpoint just make no sense. But you go back and ask the two questions, does God love me and is he in control? And if the answer is yes, I have to be okay with it. I don't have to like it,
right.
But I have to be okay with it.
You don't have to be grateful and thankful for everything. You got to be grateful and thankful in
everything. And JD's family loved JD just like God did, but unlike God, we were not in control. He was. He could have healed JD. He could have prevented him from getting sick, but he didn't. And so you have to ask, if God's faithful and God loved JD more than I did and more than his family did, there has to be a reason he took him home early. And so I rest in that. Again, do I like it? There's not a day I don't think about, dang, I miss JD, and I'm sure his family feels the same way. Everybody here does. And in life, people listening, we've all lost someone that we love, and if we haven't, we will. And again, our days are numbered. God wrote the book, and so that just sort of is a call to action for me of live every day. Live every day as unto the Lord as best we can, because we're not promised tomorrow.
No.
I'm not promised next hour. So what are we doing today to build that legacy that when it's time for our funeral, I've thought a lot about since that, what are people going to say at my funeral? And it motivates you to go to that discipline to say, why wouldn't I seek the one who made me to get the blueprint for how to live my life best so that, so that I am told, well done, good and faithful servant at the end. And, not, well, I think he's going to say that, but I'm not sure, I'm not sure, so. I'm not sure he's going to say that,
This is going to be a weird and maybe crazy question, but because I know you struggled taking how you described taking the team president job that you thought was supposed to be JD's, and Joe looked at you, and you think that Joe looked at you being like, this should be my son.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be you.
Yeah.
When did you either get comfortable with it, and did you ever at one point, here's the crazy part, feel like you were filling in for JD to be, not to be team president, but to be Joe's son? Yeah.
So I think the word that I used is, when I first got the job, I just remember telling my wife, I signed up to serve JD, not to be JD. This is really more than I can, so the idea was I felt like, not as much in the son role, but in the JD role, that everyone in the company and everyone outside the company was looking to me to now be JD. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I ain't JD. I can't be JD. And that was the pressure that was, because I felt like they don't want Dave, they want JD. So I got to be JD. You know what I mean? And that ain't going to happen.
And that's part of the question is like, did you feel like Joe was like, I want my son?
No, but see, Coach was great about it. And I think everybody here it was my own complex, and I think maybe I shared with you once before is what you're referring to is the first time I was on the plane, it was flying to the championship banquet, and it was just my wife and I and Coach, and I remember getting to the hotel and just telling Stacy the whole time all I could think about was that it was supposed to be JD and Melissa on that plane with Coach, not the two of us, and she goes, I was thinking the same thing. And the point was we recognized how difficult for him that must have been. He never, but Coach never put any of that on us, and he embraced it and was the one that asked me to do it in the first place. But I think just for me, it was just a natural, number one, I struggle with self-confidence anyway, and then number two, it's just this awkward spot of, and by the way, let's rewind a little bit. Keep in mind that for 20 years in my prayer journal, which I try to write in faithfully, to some degree, I had been doing what guys often do, or at least what I do, which is complain or whine to God, what's the deal? Why am I the t-shirt guy? Or why does nobody appreciate me? Why do I, whatever it is we think we should be doing that God, you haven't provided for me. And then little do I know that for those 20 years, and I'm lamenting often, God's like, you have no idea what I'm preparing you for. You have no idea. and now all of a sudden I'm looking back going, okay, now I get it. I had to do each one of those things to prepare me for this thing, which 20 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have said, that's impossible. This is a family business. I'm never going to have that job. I couldn't. I'm not in the family. Well, who would have thought what would happen? So it was just this combination of emotions of, okay, God, now I understand what you've been doing, but now I still don't like it because number one, I want JD back, and number two, I don't want the pressure of having to be him. And I think now I'm around 6 years into the role. There will always be some of it, but I'm much more comfortable now that while I am the link to JD, I feel like I knew him the best of anyone here, and I can represent his thinking and decisions. I do have the freedom and feel free that God didn't put me here to be JD, he put me here to be me.
100%.
And now JD and I have a common thread that we're trying to reflect Christ, and we're trying to make decisions that honor the Lord. So is Coach. So again, I've brought me to it. Which is a little less steady. Like JD, I always used to joke, his excited and depressed were about an inch apart. JD was just the most steady guy, and I'm a little more of a feeler, and I get a little more touchy-feely about stuff, and that's okay. Like God, I talk in my book about being a complement, not a clone. In corporations, hey, don't be you. Be a complement to the culture, because God made you uniquely, and God made me uniquely. I was different than JD, and so I try to bring that unique me into the role while still sprinkling in kind of how I think JD would look at things.
When you expressed your feelings to your wife about you thought Joe was always looking at you, thinking that you thought that he wished that you were JD. When did you express those feelings to Coach, and what was that like?
I'm not sure I ever actually did until I wrote my book.
Yeah.
I think he knew that, but I would say he did a great job of continually just telling me he was proud of me, and that you're the only one that could have done this. You're the right guy. Don't be you. And I think, to Coach's credit, Coach does not like having everyone around him be people that just nod their head and agree with everything he says. He likes people that will challenge him, because not a lot of people will. And one thing about me is I'm a little argumentative, and over the years he's learned I will challenge him, and he respects that. And so I think he always encouraged me, keep that. Keep your unique perspective that you had even when JD was at the table. Keep that. And so I do. And I count that as probably one of the highest areas of value that I bring to the company, is that I will challenge Coach. And again, it's not like I argue with everything he says. It's just that if I will go toe-to-toe with him on something, he knows, okay, I need to listen to Dave, because he wouldn't, he's earned the right to challenge me when he challenges me, and I'm going to listen. Doesn't mean he always changes his mind. There has been a time or two where we'll get up from a meeting and he'll walk out to the front window and he'll go, hey, can everybody come with me? And he looks out and he goes, just making sure my name is still on the sign. Just want to make sure. Okay, let's go back. And I'm like, all right, message delivered. We got you. And then ultimately it is his decision, because it is his name. But I appreciate you asking that.
This is one of my favorite questions of anybody that's involved in sports, and I know what I think and what my answer is. But do you think God cares if the 11 car wins?
Gosh,
do you think he cares if Kyle wins, or if he thinks Austin Dillon wins, or whoever?
Yes, I think God cares, but probably not in the way that we think, or for the reasons we think he cares. Because again, God is interested in the smallest details of our life. So if sports are important to us, they have to be important to him. Maybe not as much the outcomes of sports, but what we learn through the process and the discipline of the sport.
So that's my exact my exact thought.
Well, then it's the right answer.
Yeah, exactly. Because my belief is we can't sit here and say that God wants me to have this platform, to use this platform to spread his word, like that's my gift, that's my purpose, right?
Right.
And at the same time be like, he doesn't care. So you can't separate those two. Now, I don't think he cares if the Seahawks win because they're from Seattle, or if Washington wins, or what the spread is, or anything like that.
I'm going to guess he definitely doesn't care about the spread.
I don't think it's about the
he
earthly
laughs at
values.
the spread. Yeah.
Exactly. I don't think it's about the earthly values, but I do think that he is fully aware that there are human beings involved.
For sure.
There are jobs on the line. There are families involved. I mean, it's not just a game that people try to portray.
And I say this a lot. God calls us to be great at what we do, whatever it is. So if you're an athlete, that means competing to win. I have a saying, nobody cares what you think if you stink. And so if you want to have influence, I've had young students, believers who ask me, hey, what's the most important thing for a Christian business? And my answer surprises them. I'm like, be great at what you do. Number one, above anything else, because if you're not, no one cares about your platform. You don't have a platform. If you're dogging it at work, talking, gossiping, getting in late, leaving early, just people, you're going to have you're going to have a negative influence on people. So it starts with being great. So I think in any sport, in our case, it's racing. That's why I go back to our number one mission is to go fast. If we lead the most laps and win the most races, then everything else trickles down from there. You're going to have drivers and crew people that want to come here, not because we're a faith-based company because we're great at what we do. They're going to have sponsors that want to come here because we're great at what we do. Through that, all of a sudden, we get to support 75 ministries around the world. We get to hire chaplains. We get to do things like this where we talk to people about our faith because we were first faithful to what God called us to do. We were really good at our job, whatever it is. And if you're an accountant, be great at it. And great, by the way, comparison is the thief of joy. So not great compared to the person in the booth next to you. Great, the best God made you. What is the best accountant that I can be? What is the best, whatever it is that you're doing? And for us, hey, we're in racing. Be the best race team you can be, and make great decisions that lead towards making it a great company. All those things that we're called to do. But be great.
In my life, I've learned to not be upset, jealous, mad, angry at the person that got the job.
How are you doing at that? How are you doing?
I've gotten better.
Okay, yeah, that is a hard one
because
it's not fair.
No, right? Like you see someone that's on TV in my world, and you say you think you're better than them, or you think that you deserve that job, and I've stopped doing that. I've stopped because one, it's unhealthy, and I can't control any of that,
Right.
and it's also not biblical because I got to be the best me, not
No doubt.
better than whoever's next to me. But in sports, to win, you got to be better than the person that's next to you. So how do you separate those two and kind of be your best, but at the same time not be like looking around trying to compare?
Well, it's really hard. Look, somebody like Coach, who's in 2 Pro Sport Hall of Fames. Look, he's on my spiritual Mount Rushmore, but he struggles with it. I mean, we're doing this interview in the room where every Monday morning we have prayer. And we've done that for 30 years. We used to pray for every employee by name. We don't do that anymore. We're a little too big. It's kind of by category. But in this room, we try to set the tone for our week. But we go, look, if I'm honest, we go right from that to if we had a bad week, we were terrible on pit road. And I mean, we're after it because we don't like not being the best. And so the easy answer is if you're competitive, God made you that way. So it's okay to be competitive. It's okay to not like losing. But right, if winning becomes an idol to you and that becomes more important than being more like Christ, then yeah, God's going to deal with you in that way. But this idea that if I'm doing really well in my faith, we're going to be undefeated and it's going to be this perfect ending, it just doesn't work like that. In fact, if I'm honest, it's often the opposite. The times, I remember when I mentioned the ministry of Young Life. I was a volunteer leader through college, and the nights that I was going to be the speaker, like I had prepared, I'm in college, I'm in a fraternity, and I'm trying to prepare a talk to give to 100 hostile high school kids. I'm talking about bullets were flying. It's like there was these spiritual attacks, and there was more that would happen in my life on those days. Not on accident, because I was about to have influence. And I was almost like, I don't want to speak anymore, because every time something speaks, it's like the whole week leading up to it, there's just stuff, you know what I mean, going on in my life. So often when we're really pursuing the Lord, there's just going to be difficulty that we deal with. And again, it's not this recipe of do this and this happens again. We're just called to be faithful. And in the world of competition, losing is hard. Again, you can disguise it as, well, we're called to be great, and therefore I'm upset because I'm not. No, we're upset because we have an ego and we're prideful and we don't like losing. Yep. And again, I could do that job. But by the way, for 20 years, I said that here. I could be the guy that does that. I could be the guy that does that. Then all of a sudden I became the president, and I was like, I don't want to be the guy that does that. God, wait a minute. I didn't mean it, And that's often how it is in life, is we always want what someone else has. Again, it's comparison. Greener, right? Always. But that's not always the way it works.
They say, the old like kind of adage is if everyone threw their problems out in the world, I guarantee you that if you went and grabbed a random one, you wish you had your problems back.
I think that's true in a lot of cases, particularly just by nature of where we live, just living in this country. I mean, you just look around the world and you kind of go, we have no idea. We have no idea.
We're very spoiled in America.
And again, I mean, look at there's a war going on in another country, and we're getting to sit and have this great conversation. And so, I mean, we really do have no idea. And the fact that I would worry about losing a race, that's why we started off with, did we start off the year slow? Yeah. It's been 4 races. It's like, it's going to be okay. We're getting to compete in the, top form of motorsports in the United States every week. We are so grateful we have a platform. But look, we're going to keep wanting to win. There's no doubt. But, God's faithful whether we finish dead last or whether we finish first. And we just, again, we have to control what we control. And I would say as competitive people, it's really hard knowing where the line ends between controlling what I can control and releasing the rest to God, because we don't want to release anything to God. We want to control it, and we want to control freak it, and and that's hard. It's just hard.
To kind of bring this relatable journey all the way full circle, what do you think was and is your purpose 15 years ago and to today?
Isn't that interesting? 15 years ago, it was very clear. It was to be really a faithful sort of chief of staff to Jill and JD, two guys that I admired deeply. I say to students often, for me, the what is way more important than the who. So when I got a job here, I wasn't always doing what I wanted to do, but I was doing it for the who was awesome. I believed in what the organization stood for. Coach Gibbs was one of my heroes. JD was my best friend. So I'm like, this is okay, even though the what wasn't always great. Right. So at that point it was, again, serving and really just making sure those guys, there may be other people that didn't think I was doing it, whatever, but as long as Joe and JD thought I was adding value, then that was sort of, I would say that was my purpose in my company. I would say we're talking vocation here. And now it's obviously very different. And now, honestly, I'm just like you talk about being a steward of your money, I am a steward of this position. And so I've been gifted this for a season of my life. I don't know how long that season is. And so I view it as, like when I have this meeting with you, or if I get to meet with someone from NASCAR or with a sponsor, it's not about stroking my ego or building up. This is about how can I spend this time influencing this person, building this person up, breathing life into this interaction instead of sucking the life out of it or whatever. And so it really is about legacy and influence. And I've been given the privilege of being in the company of people that 15 years ago probably wouldn't have called me back or wouldn't have met with me. So what am I doing it for me, or am I doing it for the Lord? And again, probably a cliche thing to say, and I don't always do great at it, but it's how am I using this position to honor the Lord so that He tells me, hey, well done. You did it. I gave you this position for X number of years, and you were, for the most part, you were faithful to it. You weren't doing it to for your purposes. So I think it really has been a mindset shift for me. Again, both positions I would have said, I hope I'm doing this to honor the Lord, but the tactical, what does that look like? We're very different now. So again, I'm more of a how can I have influence? How can I encourage the people here? How can I use the opportunities I'm having with these influential people to proclaim the gospel in the way I act, in maybe the words I say, whatever that is. And I'm not as bold as I always should be either, by the way. But
yeah. To everybody that's either listening or watching a relatable journey right now, what is your one piece of advice after you kind of think about your journey and what you've gone through to someone that's going through something similar?
Number one, your career path will rarely, if ever, go exactly the way that you scripted, and that's okay. You talk about being great at the little things. Control the things that you can control. You can control your attitude. You can control being really good at where God, you've talked to the Benham brothers before. They say all the time, bloom where you're planted. Yep. Bloom where you're planted. You may not love it. Be great at what you do. I was just talking about having a sphere of influence. And if you're listening thinking, well, that's easy for you to say. You're the president of a company. You talk to a lot of people. I work in a cubicle every day. Okay. And I started in a broom closet and no one came to talk to me either. You still have a sphere of influence. It may be one person. My guess is it's more than one person, but it may be one person. It may be one person you pass. Be faithful to the sphere of influence that God's put you in right now. If He chooses to increase it, great. You can pray for that if that's the desire of your heart. But be faithful to what you've been entrusted with. And again, Scripture is very clear. You have to be faithful to little before you're going to be entrusted with much. But much doesn't always mean, that means you're going to be the president of a company. Again, that was my story. I'm grateful for it sometimes. But bloom right where you're planted. Be faithful to the sphere that God's put you in, and recognize that you are having an influence in your attitude, in the way that you go about your work, in the way that you go about your life with whoever it is that's in that sphere of influence. Just be faithful to that.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't let you plug your book, not only because it's your book,
I
but it
appreciate
actually
that.
goes to an awesome cause, which is
thank you.
which allows you to do it humbly.
Yeah, you're right. I can shamelessly plug it because my author proceeds are donated to the J.D. Gibbs Legacy Fund, which funds urban young life ministry here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Yeah, the book's called Taking the Lead, Winning Business Principles That Fuel Joe Gibbs Racing. And it's really the long version of the story I just shared with you, my journey from unpaid intern to president of a NASCAR team, and really what I learned along the way from really being the closest guy to coach for 30 years, a two-sport Hall of Famer, what I've learned from him. And it weaves in kind of my story of losing my best friend and how difficult that was. But hopefully a lot of the principles in it are relatable, whether you're about to start a career, in the middle of it, or whether you're an executive at your company. And it shares a little bit about my faith journey as well. And so again, I was excited to write the book because often I go speak and I can't share my testimony, but the book shares my testimony and I can give out a book that shares that. And so again, it was used, for me, it was something that gave me the ability, and hopefully someone will read that and hear the struggles and the challenges and the doubts that I had and go, that, I relate to that. You know what I mean? And would maybe start them on a faith journey as well.
Of course, I got one more. Were you a NASCAR fan as a kid?
I was not.
Because I know, because it's such a unique, and it's a unique niche sport. So I wasn't as a kid growing up either. I knew the name Jeff Gordon, Dale Earnhardt, of course, like anybody. And now I love NASCAR because of the people.
Great people.
So you weren't a NASCAR fan, now you're in the
I
team
wasn't.
NASCAR.
I had an uncle who used to take us to Richmond or Dover. He would bring us to the NASCAR races when I was a little kid. And I had no interest. The guy I picked was Darrell Waltrip. He was 88 Gatorade, and I thought that was a cool car. But I wouldn't say I never watched a race. But I went to a racetrack a few times growing up because I had an Uncle Jimmy who would bring me to the racetrack. But when Coach got into racing, I would say, no, I hadn't watched or thought about a NASCAR race in 10 years. And I did question, now, why are you guys starting a NASCAR team? But like I said before about the what versus the who, they could have been selling coat hangers and I wouldn't have cared. It was, hey, if you're starting it and you want me in, I'm helping. I'm in. And so I am glad they picked NASCAR because it actually is pretty cool. 30 years into it, I could say it's a heck of a sport, but yeah, I was not a fan beforehand like you. So
Dave, thanks so much.
Yeah, Will, appreciate it. No, thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to A Relatable Journey. However you watched or listened, please tell your friends, and also 5 stars, a like, a subscribe, whatever it takes to help spread this message. We appreciate you, and thank you again.